Mr. Lawson is currently a senior advisor at EY with over 35 years of experience in banking. He has been closely involved in the evolution of Russian banking while CEO of HSBC Russia, and before that, president of Citibank Russia. Mr. Lawson, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, how are you?
I've heard you talk about this notion of a crucible experience. Could you define that for us?
Sure. I'm going to have to backtrack a little bit so that I can put it in context.
Okay.
One of the things that when I started off teaching, I started off by reading a lot of books thinking, well, I'm now going to be a teacher, so I need to read a lot of academic stuff, and that means that I can then hang my theories, my lectures on certain theories. It turns out after a while that A, I'm a very bad student these days, and B, I sort of disagreed with most of the theories that I was reading, so I decided instead to go ahead and write from scratch. But when I started writing my material, and I wanted to focus specifically on what are the traits, what are the characteristics of leadership, and what are the skills of leadership. And the difference between those two is very simple. Skills I can teach you in a classroom. We can have skills on time management. We can have skills on public speaking. We can have skills on other aspects of communication. And even, in fact, how to create charisma, which some people don't realize, but actually it's something you can learn. But on the other hand, the other element of leadership is the concept of characteristics. And characteristics are not something that you learn, it's who you are. Every day, in every way, you are changing. This morning is different from tonight, and it will depend on what your experiences were during the course of the day. Most of us, most of the time, change gradually. However, I ran across this theory of crucibles, and this was one I really liked. The idea here is that actually not every experience is the same. Many experiences come and go, and we gradually form our characteristics. Some experiences are so extreme, and it's like the crucible in the Middle Ages, the idea being that you put iron in, you get gold out. The idea in these crucibles is these are such important moments in your life that you actually exit that moment in a different way to the way you entered it. And these crucibles are the turning points, as it were, in the creation of your character. And it's unfortunate to say, but there's no guarantee that you survive the crucible.
Okay.
It's not like this is a sort of escalator where you get on it, you go through a crucible, and you naturally emerge the other side. Sometimes these things can be very severe and actually cause you to fall apart.
So ostensibly speaking, there are different types of crucible experiences.
Yeah.
Is there a way to categorize them?
Absolutely. There are, in fact, three core groups. I mean, there may be more, but the three that these authors talked about and the ones that I focus on are three. There is the new crucible, the reversal crucible, and the suspension. So taking the first, the new one is where you get a new job, you get a new set of challenges, you're stretched beyond your normal experience. You're basically put into a situation where you are acting at levels higher than the ones that you've acted at before. It's very exciting, it's very challenging, it's very demanding, but you leave that crucible stronger than before with a stronger voice. Now, what happens next is, not necessarily immediately, by the way, and in fact, in my case, not for 22 years, which was a long period where I had one new job after other, and gradually I got larger and larger responsibilities, and it looked like it was blue sky. But at some point, you are almost certainly going to run into a reversal. Now, reversal is a polite way of saying failure. And this failure causes you to doubt yourself. It causes, your world changes in a very negative way. All those things that you assumed were going to happen in a very positive way, it suddenly looks as though that isn't the way it's going to turn out. And it's at that point that you need to come to my class on successful failure and understand that actually as long as you approach these things with the right mindset, failure is a wonderful opportunity to learn. So the third one is suspension. And suspension is one that you're unlikely to run across for many years to come, Hunter. This is where you're in retirement. This is where your life moves to a different stage. In my case, it was the day I walked out of the Chief Executive Office of HSBC and I walked into my new role as advisor. My days as a chief executive at that point were over, and I had a different role to play. And I needed to understand the rules of that new game, the rules of influence, not power. So that suspension happens at that stage where you're moving forward, and the important thing is to understand that what you've left behind is behind you. What you need to focus on is the future.
Okay, that's very interesting. Let's go back to that second crucible experience. In the context of failure, what does that look like more broadly, and what can someone do in the context of failure? How can they make steps that are both healthy and constructive?
Yeah, very good question. I think that the first thing that I'd want to emphasize here is probably the most important thing to understand about failure is that it's an opportunity to learn. And actually, if you listen to some of the most successful people that the world has to offer, these people talk about the fact that their learnings came in a large part after periods of failure. So failure by itself, no problem. Failure without learning the lesson of that particular lesson that's being delivered, then what's going to happen if you don't learn that lesson is you're likely to repeat your behavior again, and then you're going to run into the same issues. So same input, same output. The important thing to realize is that this failure is something that you need to stop, think about, avoid the big temptation, which is the temptation that most people fall into, which is to blame their failure on someone else. Take ownership for that failure. Understand that even if you weren't 100% responsible for it, that you were at least a part of the situation. And analyze, look in the mirror. Don't look in the mirror with a candle, look in a mirror with a fluorescent light and say, what is it that in my behavior caused this thing to happen? And once you've done that, and by the way, a week or two of getting very drunk, a week or two of being very angry, absolutely fine, everybody should do it, everybody does do it. But get back on the horse and look in the mirror and say, what shall I do differently? Understand that your self-worth is more important than your external, the way people deal with you. First of all, you have to have your own self-worth. If you don't have that, there's nothing much to build on. Understand also that time, as they say, is a great healer. It's true. What it means is that this moment of failure, of abject failure, of feeling like nothing's going right in the world, it will move on. But what you have to do is create these new habits that will pull you away from the old behavior and cause you to then move forward. I think there's some other things that are very important. For instance, it's very, very good idea to set aggressive targets. In other words, this is what I want to do, this is how I want to go about it, this is an achievable target. However, the idea of me being on the basketball team next week isn't going to happen. So if you create a goal that's unachievable, then what happens is you fail, and then that failure reinforces your sense of a lack of self-worth. So these targets, they need to be achievable, stretch goals, something that you can actually get to. And build on your strengths, don't build on your weaknesses. In this period, it's very tempting to start focusing on what went wrong rather than the things that have gone right. And what you're really doing here is you're focusing on your resilience, your ability to get over this problem and to move forward. Finally, if I may.
Of course.
Finally, I think what's very important here is to understand you've got to get back in the race, you've got to get back into the game, but you've got to be ready. I'll always remember after a failure of mine in 1999, 2000, I went to an interview actually with somebody that subsequently hired me. But at that time, after 20 minutes, this person said, stop. You are the single worst interviewee I've ever had. He said, you brought up your personal problems, you've blamed all your colleagues, you've blamed your old organization, you simply haven't moved forward. And the point that I'm making here is re-engage, but re-engage when you have a positive mindset, when you're ready to approach the challenges ahead of you positively.
It sounds like personal dialogue is a very important aspect of this.
Yes.
How would you describe your own personal dialogue during that phase of your life?
Well, this is actually one other thing that I didn't mention there, which I think is something that I would highly recommend, is have a diverse group of friends, have external interests, develop your personality, be somebody who is, actively engaged in the world. Because actually what happens in these periods is that if all of your friends were around your workplace, and if your workplace is just blown up, then you're left with a smouldering crater, which is both work and your social environment. If, on the other hand, you've developed a broad range of friends, you know, your friends probably don't care whether you're the vice president in charge of marketing or not. They care who you are. They care who Hunter is. And if Hunter's going through a bad time, that's when they'll stand up and be counted. They try to knock me